evening, Mr. Calvin. Do you know where you are right now?
No, where am I?
You're in a maximum security prison. There's been a series of murders, and you're a prime suspect for the case. Now, this isn't a laughing matter. We're going to ask you a few questions. So, Mr. Calvin, tell me a little bit about your life.
Well, I was born in St. Paul, Minnesota on April 8th, 1911. I grew up there with my two Russian immigrant parents who owned a small grocery store. I was always fascinated by their grocery store because I always wondered what the products that they sold were made of. This began my interest in science. My two major fields of interest in science were chemistry and biology. In 1931, at the Michigan College of Science and Technology, I received my bachelor's degree of science. In 1935, I received my PhD at the University of Minnesota. 2 years later, I began my staffing job at the University of California in Berkeley. In 1942, I met my wife and had 2 daughters and 1 son. In 1947, I was promoted to professor of chemistry at the University of California in Berkeley. Then, in 1961, I won the Nobel Prize for Chemistry for my discovery of the Calvin cycle, which was named after me. Then, in 1980, I finally retired. Unfortunately for me, in 1997, I died of a sudden heart attack when I was only 85 years old.
Oh, okay. Well, Mr. Calvin, were you inspired by any other scientific contributions during the time of your discovery?
Well, I made my discovery mostly through my own research. However, I began my own research in 1945 when I was selected to lead biological chemical efforts in utilizing newly available radioisotopes from Hanford and Oak Ridge National Laboratory in medical and photosynthesis research.
What was your main area of study?
I had 2 main areas of study, photochemistry and biochemistry.
What are those?
Photochemistry is the study of the interaction between atoms, small molecules, and light, and biochemistry is the study of the chemical processes in living organisms. I used both areas of chemistry to make my discovery of the Calvin cycle in 1961.
Photochemistry? Oh, I think I remember studying that in my high school chemistry class. Does that have anything to do with visible light or electromagnetic radiation?
Yes, officer, it does. It has to do with both of those topics.
That reminds me of this one time when my chemistry teacher shined a light through Jell-O to demonstrate the scattering of light through a colloid. We also used photochemistry in a lab that involved flame tests and spectroscopes.
It's all very interesting, officer.
You know what, Melvin? Yeah, it is interesting. And you know what else is interesting? What were other scientists doing at the time of your discovery?
Well, in 1957, Russian scientists launched the first satellite into space. Satellites are very important because they're used for communication, Google Maps, and many other important things. Soon after, Americans launched a satellite into space. This began the space race, which was an era of huge technological advancement. Knowing about chemistry plays a very important part in space exploration, such as knowing the various gases in the atmosphere. In addition, other contributions around the time of my discovery include the development of quantum chemistry theory for approximating molecular orbitals, and the development in laser technology.
So, let's talk about your biggest discovery. What is the Calvin cycle?
Well, the Calvin cycle is part of a much larger process, photosynthesis. It's the light-independent part of photosynthesis. It's a series of chemical reactions in which carbon is broken away from gaseous carbon dioxide and fixed as organic carbon in compounds that are used to make sugars and starch as food. The Calvin cycle starts with a 5-carbon sugar molecule, to which the carbon of carbon dioxide is attached by a covalent bond. This unstable molecule breaks apart into 2 3-carbon molecules, which are reduced by the electron characters ATP and ADPH, which were created by the earlier light reactions in photosynthesis. They are broken down to 3-carbon molecules that are available for the synthesis of sugar and starch. It takes 3 carbon dioxide molecules to produce enough carbon for the synthesis of one of these 3-carbon molecules, and to regenerate the 5-carbon sugar that is used to repeat the Calvin cycle over and over again.
Well, how does this apply to me?
Well, the Calvin cycle applies to everybody and every living thing on this planet in a number of ways. For one thing, the Calvin cycle is used by all plants as a part of photosynthesis, and photosynthesis produces the sugar that's necessary for plants to survive. And with plants being at the bottom of the food chain, it's really important that they survive so there's balance throughout the whole ecosystem. Photosynthesis is also important because it's responsible for the production of oxygen, and oxygen is the necessary gas for the human body to function. The Calvin cycle also uses a lot of CO2. It's responsible for the removal of 200 billion tons of CO2 every year, and it's really important that we have something to consume all this CO2 because there's already a large problem with too much CO2 in the atmosphere. Well, Mr. Calvin, those are about all the questions I have for you. Now, I still think you were probably linked to that series of murders, but there is good news. Now I know a lot more about you as a scientist, other scientists, and the Calvin cycle. You're free to go.